Hi guys and welcome back to TNG Productions, and my name is Tom and we're back with another tabletop tutorial featuring the whimsical fantasy skirmish game known as Moonstone by Goblin King Games. And in this tutorial I'm going to be using the 2-player starter set to show you exactly how to play the game. Now all the rules and materials are available online for you to try at home, and I'll put all the links you need in the description. But this video is primarily going to be a play-by-play kind of walkthrough of a couple of turns of the game so you can get your head around the mechanics and see those in action. Now as always, if you've got any questions as you watch, just pop them in the comments below and I'll be sure to get back to you. But without further ado, let's get on to it. Okay, so before we get started with the actual rules, we better show you the models that we're going to be using today. And this is from the 2-player starter set, which comes with absolutely everything you need to play, including minions, tokens, measuring widgets, cards, and most importantly, the rulebook. So we've got 2 factions here. We have the goblins, who represent the Dominion, and we have the humans that represent the Commonwealth. And all models within Moonstone fall under one of the 3 main factions. However, that being said, they all have their own representative keywords that you can play within as well. Some of them are really simple, such as their race, like human or fairy, or some of them are a little bit more specific that have certain synergies, such as soldiers or pirates, that you can take advantage of. Now, a traditional game of Moonstone has 12 models on the board at any one time, which are equally divided by the amount of players. So if it was a 2-player game, obviously that would be 6 miniatures each. Now for this one, we're just going to be using 4 aside because that's what comes in the starter set, and that's enough for us to show you the main mechanics. But with this fantastical universe they've created, there's all manner of species that you can look at, from fauns to giants to fairies to gnomes, as well as the goblins and humans that you will see here. And their principal goal will be to try and pick up moonstones which appear overnight that they need to gather and sell before the morning comes and they disappear. So with these guys introduced, let's go take a look at the board. Okay, so now we've got our troops ready to go. You can see we've got them laid out on the board beautifully, and this is usually played on a 3x3 board. And as we've said, we're going to be using the starter set characters here, so a slightly smaller game. Now once you've chosen your troop and once you've played them out, essentially you need to grow the moonstones that we're going to compete for. And moonstones are essentially these mythical items that grow at night that the troops are trying to grab and then sell off to the wizards in the city before they kind of expire with the daybreak. And this means the game usually lasts 4 turns, going to a 5th turn if you're level on points. You basically play sudden death to see who can grab the last one first. And once we've got everything laid out, we get our handful of d4s, and essentially we do something called a drop. We just literally drop them onto the board and see where they scatter. Now each player gets to call a mulligan just in case they don't like where these land. And essentially the moonstones will land with a number facing upwards on the d4, and that will refer to how deep they are in the ground. So 1 being quite shallow, obviously 4 being very much deep rooted in the ground. And the aim of our game, as I said, is to try and pull them out, and we'll talk about how that works in a second. Now for most games of Moonstone, if you're playing the full amount, so 6 characters per side or 12 in total if you're doing a 3 or 4 player game, you'll have 7 moonstones. For the sake of our smaller game system, we're just going to use 5, which works a lot better for kind of this 4-a-side starter set game. So once we've got everything ready to go with that, we then deploy. So players will usually roll off with a die, and this is one of only 2 times really a die is going to be involved. And the winner will decide to either be what we call the early bird or the player with initiative. So for the sake of our example, the Commonwealth humans here were the early birds. That means they get to pick a side to deploy from, and they deploy first, anywhere 10 inches from the edge of the board. So you can see they picked, let's say, Baron von Fancy Hat first. He deployed, and then you take it in turns with the other player going, which would be the goblins over here of Dominion, and back and forth until you fully deployed your forces. Now, because the Commonwealth were the early bird, that will give initiative to the Dominion, the goblins, and that essentially means that they will be going first in turn 1, and they'll actually have a bonus to the roll-off in subsequent turns that come a little bit later. Now, despite the fact this is a 4-turn game, I'm obviously only going to show you 1 or 2 turns just to get the base mechanics down, but there is a really interesting thing that you can add to spice this game up. There is an additional deck of cards which are called events and agendas, and essentially each player can pick 2 cards from this deck, and it's completely optional, but what it does is it gives you certain things that can affect the game. Now in general, events are like one-time awesome things that happen, like you ignore all wounds on an attack or you get to move a little bit faster. Whereas agendas tend to be like ongoing buffs that benefit a certain type of crew. So maybe you take an agenda that benefits soldiers. So Baron von Fancyhack and his crew get a bit of a benefit from that because they're more trained. Or you get one that benefits spellcasters. Maybe some of the goblins like Beaky Bobby can benefit from them. We're not going to use them for this example because the new Kickstarter is about to come out, The Arising, and that features an entire campaign deck. So I don't want to outdate this video because there might be really cool fun ones that we can use in subsequent battles. So once we've got everything out on the board, ready to play, we're then ready to start a turn. So let's get a little bit closer and we'll talk about how that works. Okay, now we've zoomed in a little bit, you might see that these characters have now got some tokens next to them, each one with different colours. So we've got green for the Dominion, we've got yellow for the Commonwealth, and this is to represent energy. And energy is our main currency within Moonstone of taking actions and using our abilities. And quite simply, a turn of Moonstone has 3 distinct sections or steps. There's a replenish step where we generate our energy. There's the activation step where we do all of our actions. And then there's a discard step at the end where we get rid of all the energy that hasn't been spent for that turn. Now, energy can easily be found on a character's card. It's at the bottom where their health is, and it's denoted by blue dots. And essentially you will count up during this first replenish step how many blue dots are available, and you will put that energy next to that character or on their card, whichever's easiest for you. I'm going to put it in front of the character so you can visualize it. Now, the interesting thing about tying it to the health bar is you mark your health from right to left. So as you take away health boxes, there might be a point where you actually mark off one of these blue dots. So very naturally, in subsequent turns, when your models are taking a bit of a beating, they'll actually generate less energy, which I think is really thematic as they're struggling to kind of get through the battle as things progress. Now, it might also seem that this is a little bit unfair because you can see our Commonwealth humans here are generating quite a bit less in terms of energy compared to the Dominion goblins. And that's because in general, the humans are a little bit more tanky, but a little bit less energetic, can do less, whereas the goblins tend to be a little bit more tricksy, but they can't take a punch as well, so they have to have a little bit more energy to balance things out. Now, the final thing we need to decide is who is going to activate first, and this is where that early bird versus initiative comes in. Because the Commonwealth deployed first, the Dominion have the initiative, meaning for turn 1, they go first. Full stop, no roll off, no nothing. For every subsequent turn, so turn 2 onwards, you conduct a roll off. The player with initiative for turn 2 actually gets to add 2 to their roll, and turn 3 they add 1 to their roll, and then turn 4 onwards it's just a 50-50 roll off. So there is a real tactile choice between being the early bird or the player with initiative in terms of giving an advantage to those roll offs. That being said, sometimes it is good to go second in turn because it means you get the last activation of the turn, which is usually unopposed. So now we've got all of our energy out, we've got our characters ready and raring to go, we've completed our replenish step, so let's get to the activations and show you how this game is played. Okay then, so starting with the Dominion, we're going to start with the lovely Grub here, who's kind of had a fair few accidents during his magical training, and you can see he has generated 4 energy for this turn. So let's start with the real basics, which is how we're going to actually get these Moonstones, seeing as that is the purpose of the game. So there's a variety of actions that Grub has available to him. Some of them are universal and some of them are printed on his card specifically. We're going to start with the universal actions and then we'll build up there. So the first thing that all models are able to do in this game is to take a jog action, and this is the only real free action in the game. And it's quite simply a 4-inch move. So he can see that there's a Moonstone here. So Grub is going to take his 4-inch move, which will place him just to this position. Now, in order for him to start trying to pick up this Moonstone, he needs to be in base contact with it, and he can't jog more than once. He needs to get a little bit closer. So the first thing we're going to do is spend an energy to take what is called a step action. Now, this step can be done at any point. You don't have to go jog then step. You could step first if you wanted to, but it allows you just a 1-inch move. So he is simply going to move an inch to this position here so that he is now within base contact with that Moonstone. So pretty straightforward movement mechanics, but this allows you to kind of make extra moves or steps so you can get ready for attacks and things like that. The other interesting thing about the step action, which we'll come on to later, if you've got an energy on you and it's not your activation, you can take something called a reactionary step. So when someone else completes an action, whatever it is, not an activation, just an action, you can spend one of your energies on your models to take a step, take an inch move. So that could be useful for getting you out of firing range, just moving outside of someone's melee, which is really handy. So Grub is now in base contact with his Moonstone. He's going to start pulling it out. So we're going to take the very straightforward harvest action. And Harvest simply says that if you are in base contact with a Moonstone, you can spend an energy to reduce its depth value by 1. So it's currently depth of 3, so it's quite deep in the ground. So we would simply flip this to a 2 to reduce its depth as he starts kind of pulling at it. Now, some models actually reduce this quicker because they're very strong. Some, like Beaky Bobby here, have the weakling rule, so they actually have to spend like 2 energy to do it. But Grub, he's pretty tough. He's been to the gym. He knows what he's doing. So he's just going to do it again. He's going to spend another energy to reduce it to a depth value of 1. And then once he has a Moonstone at a depth value of 1, all he has to do is harvest one more time and he will gain access to it. So let's do that. Let's get him geared up straight away. So he is going to pick up with his last energy this Moonstone token, and I'm simply going to put it on his card so I know that he has it. Now, he is now going to become a priority target. He has one of these Moonstones ready and raring to go. So if he has it at the end of the game, that's going to be one of the main ways that they're going to score a victory. But having a Moonstone does carry a little bit of a burden. Well, a literal burden, actually, because it's quite heavy. So it gives your characters a new condition, which is called slow. And this reduces their jog by 2 inches. So it basically means they've only got a 2-inch jog for subsequent activations. Doesn't affect steps, doesn't affect anything else. It's purely just you're lugging this Moonstone behind. It's pretty hefty. So it means that he now is a little bit less maneuverable, but he does have one of those key items. So pretty good start for the Dominion. Okay then, on to the Commonwealth, and we're going to start with Eric the Squire, who's going to show us what an active ability is. So, just like Grub before him, he's going to take his free 4-inch jog, and he's going to move himself into base contact with this Moonstone here, with the hope that he will be able to shortly start harvesting it. Now, Eric generates 3 energy. So we're going to see if we can use some of that, not just for harvesting, but to actually set up a later part of our turn. So if we bring up his card, you can see that he has some stats at the top, which are not important for now. And then he has 3 sections that are divided by lines. You've got a top bit, which are his passive abilities. These are things that are always on. So you can see he's got one that's called Squire, and he's got his Leather Jerkin to reduce damage. He's then got a middle section, which are called active abilities, and these are abilities that he can spend influence to use. And then you've got one underneath, which is an arcane ability, which again requires influence, but brings in the arcane deck that we're going to talk about shortly. For now, all we're going to do is focus on that middle section, which is his active abilities. And you can see he's got an ability called My Hero. And next to it, it's got a number in brackets, which are its energy cost. So he's going to activate My Hero. It's going to cost him 2 energy. And you can see next to it has a distance of 4 inches, which is its range. He's going to be using My Hero on Baron Von Fancy Hat because, of course, he's heroic. He's got an awesome hat, so of course you can look up to him. And you can see the ability says target soldier gains 1 energy or target noble gains 2 energy. And if we flip to the Baron's card, you can see just underneath his name, it says his kind of qualities or stats or types. You can see he's a human, but he's a noble. So he will actually gain 2 energy as Eric gives him a pep talk and talks about how he idolizes his swords play. So we're just going to put 2 energy on the Baron there. So basically it's just a swap action, which is really handy for it because it means the Baron is now really geared up to do some damage if he can get in range for his activation. But Eric, of course, has still got 1 energy left on him. He's simply going to spend it just like Grub did to reduce the depth value of the Moonstone that he is stood next to by 1, meaning that next turn, hopefully, he will be able to pick it up. Back to the Dominion then, we're going to go with Beaky Bobby, who's going to show us a fair few new tricks that we can do with movement. Now, you might be wondering why Beaky Bobby wasn't the one who went first to grab hold of that Moonstone. As we said, it's because he has a passive ability in the top section of his card, which is called Weakling, which means that he reduces all melee damage that he deals by 1, and his harvest actions cost +1 energy. So it means he would be spending 2 energy each time he's trying to pull a Moonstone up, and that's not great. It means that he's more suited to kind of other shenanigans, which we'll be able to do in later turns. So the first thing Bobby is going to do, just to show that you don't have to jog or move first, he's actually going to use one of his active abilities, which is called Stand Back. And Stand Back, it costs him 1 energy to perform, and it is a 2-inch pulse. Now, pulses are really interesting in Moonstone, that they always affect the character who's using it unless it says other models in the name. And this is a really good way of demonstrating this because Beaky Bobby actually has 2 pulses available to him. We're using Stand Back, which says all other models within a 2-inch pulse move 1 inch directly away. But you can see that he has one called Foul Gases that he spends 2 energy for, and it says all models within the pulse suffer 2 magical damage, so that would affect Beaky Bobby. But as I said, we're just going to use the nice and straightforward Stand Back, which means that he's going to push Grub 1 inch forward because he's basically going, not so much stand back, but go get stuck in. So we're just going to push Grub 1 inch here, thanks to that ability. And that's another way of us using kind of out of activation movement to our advantage. But we've still got 3 energy left to spend, and obviously Beaky Bobby can make his jog, which he will in a second. But I'm just going to demonstrate how terrain works a little bit here, because a jog is perfectly fine when you're on a lovely cobbled street, but there are restrictions to it. You cannot jog through forests, and you cannot jog even through water features. And actually, if you're engaged by an enemy, you can't jog away from them. You have to kind of walk towards them, but we'll talk about that shortly. So it means that this step action is really important. But what happens if, let's say, for example, Beaky Bobby's been doing a bit of his alchemy work, there's an obstacle in the way? Well, you could take 2 step actions to walk around it. You could jog around it. You don't have to go the full 4 inches. But let's say you've exhausted most of your options and you just want to get the other side. Well, there is an ability called Traverse, which costs you 2 energy and would quite simply put you on the other side of an obstacle as long as it is only 1 inch in depth or width, shall we say. So in this case, Beaky Bobby would have to spend 2 energy just to try and get himself over a table. Now, obviously, we know the table's not there, so we're going to give him his energy back and he can just do his normal actions as he would. So he is quite simply going to make his 4 inch jog, which will take him just to this position here. And then with his 3 energy left, all he's going to do quite simply is going to make 3 step actions. Now, you might think, why does he not just move 3 inches? Well, that's because the Commonwealth might need to interrupt at the end of one of those actions and take a reaction step, as we've said. So we're just going to do a 1 inch move to there for 1 energy, no response. Another 1 inch move to there, no response. And another 1 inch move to there, just to spend his energy and keep that on him for the subsequent turns. So he's ready to kind of threaten Eric. Okay, so that's enough moving then. Let's show you how attacks work, and we're going to go with Flintlock, who's going to demonstrate some arcane abilities. And you can see he's got 3 energy to spend. So the first thing he's going to do, he's going to take his jog action just to move 4 inches to this position here. And then he's going to line up a shot with his wonderful musket. Now, an arcane ability is usually at the bottom of the card, and you can tell it's an arcane ability because it usually has a coloured box at the start, which will either have a number in it or an X, and I'll explain exactly how that works to begin with. But let's go through the basic process. You can see it has a 1 in brackets, meaning it's going to cost 1 energy to fire, and it has a 12-inch range. You can see I've already pre-measured 10 inches to Doug the Flatulent, so an extra 2, easily within range to fire a shot at the goblin that is on the pug. So we then have a look at the ability. You can see it says once per game unless reloaded, and it's got a really handy circle for you to mark when, if he has reloaded his gun. And then we come to this coloured box. So it says green coloured box with an X in it. Target suffers X plus 2 impact damage. And the actual type of damage, whether it's piercing, impact, magical, is important because certain models have resistances to certain types of damage. You can see underneath that it has a catastrophe quota or impact as well. We're not going to worry about that for now. I'll talk you through how catastrophes work shortly, but what I am going to bring in is the wonderful, exciting Arcane deck. Now, this is kind of one of Moonstone's unique things. It has 2 decks of cards, one for Arcane ability and one for melee. So this Arcane deck will allow us to see if we are successful. Now, because there is a green marked X, we need to look for a green card in this deck. And there are 3 different colours. There's green, blue, and kind of a pinky red colour. And there's a variety of number cards that go in, but I'll explain how that works in a second. First thing we need to do is we need to look at Flintlock's Arcane stat. He has a stat of 3, and that means that's the amount of cards that he will draw from the deck. But before he draws, he also needs to look at Doug the Flatulence card and see what Doug's evade stat is. Now, sometimes a really small, difficult to hit target might be at a -1 or a -2, meaning you actually draw less cards when you're trying to hit them, making it harder. Some of them might be quite big targets, like poor Friar Flavius here. He adds 1, so he actually makes it easier for him to be hit. But Doug is a really nice straightforward target, which is why I've picked him. He has an evade stat of 0, so he doesn't affect the amount of cards that Flintlock draws, so he's going to pick his 3. So let's get our 3 cards. We get a blue, a pink, and a green. And you can see we have different numbers on these cards. Now within this deck, there are 3 of each colour of a 1 value. There are 2 of each colour at a 2 value, and there is 1 card of each colour at a 3 value. But it's not only Flintlock who draws cards. Doug draws cards as well. And the defending player almost always draws 6. So let's see what Doug's going to get. He gets 3, 4, 5, 6. Now this is really interesting. So Doug has managed to draw the 1, 3 of greens, which means he knows for certain he has the only one in the deck. He's also drawn a little bit of variety of the other colours which aren't as important, and he's got a 1 of greens. Now Doug doesn't actually have to do anything with his cards. It's Flintlock who has to decide what to do. So Flintlock, quite luckily, has got his 2 of greens. So he is quite simply not going to show this to Doug. He is going to place it face down on the board, and he is going to declare the value of that card. Now, Flintlock doesn't have to tell the truth. So this is where the guessing game begins, because Flintlock could push his luck, and he could actually say that's a 3 of greens, and that is why Doug drawing cards is really important, because Doug will know, well, actually, he's lying because I have it. But it allows you to work out, depending on what you've drawn, what the best chances are. But Flintlock is a honest and upstanding human, so he is simply going to declare that he has got a 2 of greens. And that means that Doug now has to decide whether he's okay with that or to call Flintlock on a bluff. But because Doug knows that Flintlock is an honourable person, he's not going to call him on it. He's not going to say it's a bluff. He's going to accept it. And the interesting part about this is this card does not get revealed if the other player accepts it. So Doug will never know if Flintlock was telling the truth. I mean, he was, we know. But all of those cards then go back into the deck. Now, you might be wondering even what happens if you do get called out on a lie, and we'll talk about how that happens in a second. But for now, Flintlock has been successful for that card, which was a green 2. So if we go back to his character card, quite simply, we can see that Doug will suffer X plus 2 impact damage. So that would be 2 plus 2 impact damage, meaning that it's 4. So we go over to Doug's card and we see if he's got any ways of reducing that, which would be his passive abilities at the top. And actually, if we look at his card, we can see that he's equipped with a jousting shield, which reduces piercing and impact damage suffered by -1. So that 4 damage will go down to 3, meaning he has 5 health left. Now we have crossed out one of his blue pips there, but he doesn't lose the energy straight away. It just means next turn, if he hasn't healed that up, he'll reduce the energy that he generates. So Flintlock's done really well there. He's fired his musket. That's his once per kind of game shot done, unless he reloads it. And obviously that's what we're going to do next. So he's going to use his active ability to use the reload action, which you can see costs 2 energy in brackets. And that means that his gun is quite simply ready and raring to go for next turn. Okay, so now we've got to grips with arcane abilities. Let's see exactly what happens when things don't go exactly to plan. So we're going to go with the appropriately named Vicious Midget to start with. And he is going to step up with his 4-inch jog and put himself in this position here, right next to this Moonstone. Now, the Vicious Midget could pick the Moonstone up, but he's much better suited to close combats. Even though he might not be able to get an attack off this turn, he kind of wants to be able to do some damage going into the next one. Now, you can see he's pre-measured 6 inches away from Flintlock, and you can see that he's just out at the moment. So he's going to spend 1 of his energy to simply make a step action, just to bring him within 6 inches of Flintlock. And that is now going to allow him to use his ability, which is his arcane skill at the bottom of his card, called Where Did You Come From? And we're going to go through the exact same process as we did with Flintlock. So we're going to pay the cost to start with, which in this case is 2 energy. And we're going to measure our 6-inch range, which you can see that we already have, to see if we are within range of Flintlock. Now this ability requires a pink coloured card, a value of X, and it says place this model anywhere in base contact with the target enemy. So we're hoping that we can pull off a sneaky kind of teleport here if we are fortunate. So let's see what the Vicious Midget is able to do. So we're going to draw from our Arcane deck and we are looking for a pink card. So we get, oh, it's not looking good. So we have got 2 1s and a 2, but all green and blue. Now, Flintlock has an evade stat of 0, so it didn't affect the starting hand that we drew with. Obviously, it didn't reduce it or add to it. But in response, Flintlock will now be able to draw 6 cards. So he's going to draw them. There we go. So I'm going to keep those off camera for a second. So let's think we're the Vicious Midget here. Now, if you draw a hand that you don't like, you can just pass and just say, no, it's okay. And then there's no consequences to that. Obviously, you've just drawn badly. Now, the Vicious Midget isn't. He's sneaky. He's going to see if he can pull this off. So all we need is a pink of any colour. So there's no point us risking saying that it's pink 3 or even really pink 2 because you know that there's less of those cards in the deck. So unless by some miracle the Flintlock has drawn all of the pink smaller cards like the value of 1, it's probably worth us bluffing here. So let's put down this card here and we're going to say that that is a pink 1, the Vicious Midget is anyway. So Flintlock's got a choice. He can either say, okay, in which the ability just goes off, or he can call the midget's bluff. And, you know, anyone called the Vicious Midget, you're going to be a little bit suspicious, aren't you? So Flintlock is going to call bluff. And one of 2 things will happen here. Either he will be revealed to be lying, or this might be a mistake, which we're going to come on to. So Flintlock looks at his cards, he goes bluff. Vicious Midget then has to reveal this card. And look, he's been bluffing. That's no surprise to us, but it is to the midget. He's not happy with the fact that he's been found out. Flintlock now gets to look at his hand and replace that card with any card value he wants. And this is what Flintlock has. So obviously there'd be absolutely no point Flintlock replacing the card with a pink because that would make the ability succeed. He could choose to just replace it with the blue or the green because that would just still make the ability fail. It hasn't been the requisite colour. But you'll notice that he has this catastrophe card instead. So Flintlock is going to replace the Vicious Midget's card with a catastrophe. And this is where that catastrophe effect happens. Now, usually this is things like damage or just unwanted consequences. Maybe your gun blows up or you get zapped across the board. For the Where Did You Come From ability on the Vicious Midget, it simply says, catastrophe, the resisting player places this model anywhere within 6 inches. So it means that Flintlock now gets to decide whether to move the Vicious Midget and 6 inches. Well, do you know what, Vicious Midget? You were so desperate to get into combat. Let's put you all the way back over here and you can be well out of it. And again, those deck of cards, those cards that we drew from the Arcane deck, they get shuffled straight back in. So again, we know the probability for future actions. But unfortunately for the Vicious Midget, he's been found lying there. Right, so we're getting quite confident with Arcane actions here. So let's see if we can do one more permutation, which is what happens when someone calls a bluff incorrectly. So to demonstrate this, we're going to use the wonderful Baron von Fancy Hat, who's now on 4 energy thanks to Eric's kind of pep talk and admiration of him. He's going to do the normal routine. He's going to jog 4 inches to this position here. And then he is going to try and fire his pistol at Beaky Bobby. Now, the pistol is nowhere near as good as Flintlock's musket, but it's not too bad. It costs him 1 energy to fire. And essentially the Baron is going to be looking for a green card from his Arcane deck. So the Baron has an Arcane stat of a 3. However, Beaky Bobby has an evade stat of -1, meaning the Baron will draw 1 less card. The Baron's going to draw 2 cards and he is looking for green, so he draws, not bad at all, 2 green cards. And Beaky Bobby is going to draw his 6 from the Arcane deck, which we'll not worry about for now. And the Baron has now got to decide what he's going to do. So his pistol, it's 8-inch range, which we're definitely with him. It's once per game, again, unless it's reloaded. And it says the target suffers X plus 1 impact damage. Now, the Baron's got to be careful with lying here because his catastrophe is quite nasty. He suffers 3 wounds, basically the gun goes off in his hand. But we know that he doesn't have to worry too much about that. So, the Baron is going to place this card face down and he's going to declare, rather than pushing his luck and saying it's a 2 or a 3, he's going to declare that is a 1 of greens. Now, Beaky Bobby has a hand of cards that he can look at. In fact, I will now show you what he had. You can see that he has got a fair few green cards here. He's got a 3, a 2, and a 1. So Beaky Bobby's looking at this thinking, I've actually got a fair few of the green cards. I reckon the Baron's lying. So Beaky Bobby is going to declare, you are bluffing to the Baron. In which case, the Baron must now reveal his card. And it turns out, like all good Barons, of course, he's telling the truth, which means Beaky Bobby has made a mistake. And you might be wondering, what's the consequence then of wrongly calling a bluff? Well, first of all, the ability goes through as it is. So this would be X plus 1 impact damage going through to Beaky Bobby, who has no way of reducing it. So he just takes 2 wounds and is knocked down to 5. Now, because that bluff has been called, the Baron may choose from his selected hand of cards to use the ability again, using the exact same process. And he could even pick a different target as long as they're legal. So for this case, it'd be within 8 inches. But you know what? The Baron's going to shoot at Beaky Bobby again for calling him a liar. Now, let's say, for example, the Baron didn't have another green card. Let's say he had like a catastrophe or a pink. He could try and bluff, or he could just pass. You know, there's no point taking the risk if you don't want to. But the Baron is again. He's going to turn around and go, do you know what? Green 1. And Beaky Bobby, having eaten a bullet this time, he's just going to accept it and go, yeah, all right, you've got it. Okay, I'm not going to call your bluff. In which case, the Baron does not have to reveal this card. And again, the same effect goes through. So this is going to be green plus 1 impact damage going through. So Beaky Bobby takes another 2 wounds. That puts him at 3 health. So you can see there are some dire consequences to when bluffing doesn't go well. Now, while we're talking about shooting, let's do one extra permutation for you. And that is when cover comes into play. So let's take our trusty stunt table here. Essentially, this is really simple in Moonstone. Cover will affect the amount of arcane cards that you draw. So, clear line of sight means that all lines between your bases are able to be drawn. Essentially, if you have a line of sight between your bases obscured by a piece of terrain, but the center of your bases can still see each other, then it will essentially just impose a -1 card to your draw. So you'll draw -1 from the Arcane deck. However, if you have got something, and I'm saying something here because it can also be intervening models, obstructing a clear line between the middle of your bases, that will actually impose a -2. Now, whatever you're doing with cards, you will always be able to draw 1 card. But, for example, if this table's right in the way there, Baron von Fancy Hat would be on an Arcane stat of 3 at -2 because of the table, -1 because of Beaky Bobby, so he'd be drawing just the 1 card. So terrain is important and intervening models are important. They are physical things that you can't just move through or shoot through without a consequence. That being said, you can use arcane abilities when someone else is in close combat. There's nothing that really interferes that, and we'll talk about how melee works in a second. But for now, the Baron has done pretty well. He's inflicted a fair bit of damage with his shot. You can imagine he pinged it through Beaky Bobby and it like ricocheted back into him as well. So that gun's pretty good. So let's just go with a very simple reload action with our active abilities. So that's going to cost us 2 energy to reload the gun. And the Baron quite simply wants to get himself into a position where he's ready for the next turn. So he could keep hold of that energy just for now, but it's unlikely anything's going to happen. So he's just going to take a step action, and he is just going to step himself an inch forward to this position here, just so he's ready to protect Eric the Squire if anyone comes for him next. Okay, so that's enough of the gentlemanly shooting at each other. Let's get into the down and dirty melee now, and I have just the Goblin for the job with Doug the Flatulent, who's going to try and see if he can exert some revenge on Flintlock and demonstrate this really cool melee mechanic that comes with Moonstone. So let's start with the basics. We've got 4 energy to spend. Doug is going to take a jog action of 4 inches, which places him here. The next thing he's going to do is he's going to spend 1 of his energy to make a 1-inch step action, and he is simply just going to move 1 inch to there. And the reasoning for that is he's going to use one of his active abilities, which requires him to be 6 inches closer to Flintlock. Now, Doug's really interesting. He doesn't actually have any arcane abilities. He has a lot of passive, and he has 2 active abilities. The one we're looking at is called Charge. And this costs him 2 energy and has a 6-inch range, which is exactly why we've had to take that step action. Now, this isn't going to need to be opposed. It simply says, move this model 4 inches directly towards target enemy model. If this character's next action this turn is a melee attack against the same target, it deals +2 damage. So, first part of this then, we've spent our 2. Doug gets to move 4 inches directly towards the target, so straight into him. And now he's got 1 energy left, which he can see if he can use a melee attack. Now, different models in the game have different ranges and different proficiencies with their melee. So if we pull up Doug's card, you can see at the top, as opposed to the arcane stats we were using on the right hand side, we're now going to use the melee and range. And you can see under range, he has a hefty 3-inch melee range. That's probably because he's got a massive lance that he can use. So you can see he is absolutely within range of Flintlock. However, if we flip over to Flintlock's card, we can see that Flintlock only has a range of 1 inch. So at the moment, Doug is engaging Flintlock, but not being engaged by him. And this is really important because when melee happens, both parties can be injured by each other at the same time, but you can only deal damage if you are actually engaging the enemy. It's not like you throw their sword at them to try and do some damage. So at the moment, Doug is the only one who can actually inflict pain on Flintlock. So Flintlock needs to be very careful here, knowing that this is going to get a bonus. So let's spend our 1 energy to make a melee attack, and that's all it costs. 1 energy, you can make an attack. So if you're within range, you can keep spending this to keep doing attacks. And we're going to bring in the second deck in Moonstone, which is the melee deck. Now, I really like this mechanic because the designer of the game has lots of experience kind of in historical sword fighting, which is an amazing thing to be able to bring to a fantasy war game. And essentially the idea here is that both parties should be active during a melee. And this is exactly how this works. So for Doug, he is the attacker in this situation. He's initiating this fight. So we look at his melee stat, and he has a stat of 4, and that is the amount of cards that he actually draws from the melee deck. But because he's the attacker, he gets a +2 bonus. So he actually draws 6 cards from the deck, which I have pre-drawn already, and I will flash in front of you just here. Now you'll note there are different colours here to these cards. We have blue cards and we have kind of red tinted cards, and that is because some are defensive and some are attacking. And Doug has a choice here of what he's going to attack with. Now before he does anything else, Flintlock gets to draw his cards based on his melee stat. Now he gets no bonus because he is the defender, so he's simply going to draw 3 cards, and you can see he's got 1 of these red more attacking ones and he has got 2 blue more defensive ones. Now this is really a highly advanced game of rock, paper, scissors here, because certain models do more damage or less damage with certain types of attacks, and certain types of attacks are more effective against others. So let's start with Doug. Out of his 6 cards, I think the best option for him is going to be this one here, Falling Swing, which I'm going to put on screen very quickly. Now Falling Swing has 2 types of damage that it can inflict, either impact or slicing, and has decent damage coverage against most types of defense, and 1 or 2 that it doesn't do great. And the cards are really straightforward. They tell you, in a rock, paper, scissors style of way, if the opponent plays the other type of card, how much damage you deal and how much damage you suffer. Now, initially, we put this card face down. So Doug is going to put his Falling Swing, face down. Whereas we're going to have the Flintlock player place this unknown card face down. So at this point, both players reveal. So as we know, Doug has revealed Falling Swing, and Flintlock is going to reveal a low guard. There's no point Flintlock trying to deal a damaging attack here because he's not within range. So both players can look at their cards for reference. We'll look at Falling Swing. A Falling Swing against a low guard deals 2 damage and suffers none. So at this point, Doug would deal 2 damage to Flintlock. However, if you remember before, because he charged, he gets to add 2 damage to this. Now Doug has to declare what type of damage he's doing, and that's actually because his lance can't really do slashing damage. You know, you can't really slash someone with a lance unless you're really good at fighting. So Doug is going to declare that this is going to be impact damage, essentially. He's just going to absolutely whack him on the head with this lance rather than trying to slice him. So that 2 damage, as we said, becomes 4. And that puts poor old Flintlock down to 4 wounds straight away as Doug exacts his revenge. Now, there are other complications with melee. You can see some of the blocks on the damage and suffered have a yellow circle. We'll explain those next turn. And also characters have what they call signature attacks, which are ways they can modify this melee attack to do even more damage. But for now, if you've got the basic grasp of how this deck functions, we're exactly where we need to be. Okay, at this stage we've demonstrated pretty much every universal action, so we're going to end the turn with Friar Flavius just to show you some extra complications that might occur before we go on to the advanced stuff next turn. So he's simply going to move 4 inches. Now the Friar is kind of our cleric, our healer, and he's going to go for this Moonstone. So he's going to spend one of the 3 energy that he has generated to take a step action to go into base contact with this Moonstone. Now, you might think that he'll be able to actually uproot it, pull it out at this stage, but unfortunately, the harvest action cannot be taken when you are engaged. And if you remember, Doug the Flatulent has a 3-inch melee zone with his lance, meaning that the Friar is unable to pull out that Moonstone from the ground. Now, the other important things about this is that next turn, if the Friar wants to take a jog, he's got to move towards Doug, he can't move away, which is again why steps are useful. You can step out of a melee zone rather than trying to take a jog and then you can use your jog afterwards. But actually, because he's our healer, the Friar's going to look over his shoulder to poor old Flintlock and he's going to use his last ability, which is going to be his Arcane skill, which is simply called Healing. And he's going to spend 2 energy to target an ally within 8 inches, and this is going to be using his Arcane stat of 3. Now, he's targeting a Flintlock, doesn't need to worry too much about evade because it'd be a 0 anyway, but he needs a blue card here. So we're going to draw 3 cards for the Friar, and he manages to draw these 3. Now, even though I'm targeting a friendly model, the opposing side, or the player to the left if it's multiplayer, still draws their 6 cards because they still need to decide whether or not you are bluffing. So we are going to draw 6 cards, look at that, all of the greens in the world, for Doug the Flatulence controlling player. But the Friar's not going to do anything too fancy here. He's just going to put down this 1 card, and he is going to declare that that is a blue 1. And because Doug has pulled all of the greens in the world, he's going to take the Friar's word for it. That card is not going to be revealed. They're all going to go back in the Arcane deck. But the healing ability means target restores X plus 1 wounds, meaning Buddy Bye Flintlock is going to go back up to 6 wounds, having only sustained 2 now thanks to that healing. And at this stage, we would then wrap up as we head towards the next turn. So if there is any energy that is left on the board, we would discard that. If we were at turn 4, we'd check any win conditions for the most amount of Moonstones. But for now, quite simply, we can go set up for turn 2. And here we are then at the end of turn 1. You can see I've removed the trees just so you can see what's going on. So now the turn is finished, we start a new turn with the Replenish step. So this is where we have to check carefully to see how much energy these guys have based on the wounds they've taken. And you'll notice that both Doug the Flatulent and Beaky Bobby are generating less energy this turn because they've sustained wounds. So actually it's quite lucky that Friar Flavius healed Flintlock, otherwise he'd be in the same boat. So it already kind of puts the Dominion's backs against the wall, shall we say. So once we've got that Replenish ready to go, we're ready to start our turn. So we have to see who's going to go first. And if you remember, I said the team that had initiative, which would be the Goblins in this sense, from turn 2, they get +2 to their roll. Turn 3, they get +1. Turn 4, it's an even roll. So we can use a black dice for the Dominion, a green dice for the Commonwealth, and they get 5 apiece, but we're adding 2 to the black, so it will be the Dominion who will start us off with turn 2, where we'll start looking at some of the advanced moves that you can make. Okay, so our first activation of turn 2 is going to go with Beaky Bobby, who's really not feeling great at the moment after the kind of beating that he received from Baron von Fancy Hat's kind of double pistol shot. So we're going to look for a little bit of redemption here for Bobby. So the first thing he's going to do is he's going to make a jog. Now, you don't have to go the full 4 inches. He's going to move about 3 inches just to this position here, so that he's within 2 inches of Baron von Fancy Hat and within 1 inch of Eric the Squire. What he's then going to do is spend his very limited 2 energy to use his Foul Gases ability that we talked about earlier. Now, this is a 2-inch pulse. And what this will do is all models within the pulse will suffer 2 magical damage. So straight away, Baron von Fancy Hat has no way of reducing that. That means he goes down to 5 health. Likewise, Eric the Squire has no way of reducing this. He goes down to 5 health as well. But as we said, unless it says other models, Beaky Bobby would also suffer damage, but he has a passive ability called magic resistance. He reduces that damage by 1, so he just takes a single point, which leaves him on 2 health. But interestingly now, it leaves him in a little bit of a precarious position, so we can show you just how ganging up distraction combat works next. Okay, we're now going to show you how combat is affected when you've got different permutations of like 1 or more assailants attacking you. In order to show this, we're going to go with Baron von Fancy Hat, who is going to spend 1 of his 2 energy to make an attack on poor Beaky Bobby, who I've conveniently left within his 2-inch melee zone. Now, Baron von Fancy Hat isn't the only one engaging Beaky Bobby. We've also got Eric the Squire, who has a 1-inch melee range, as does Beaky Bobby. So we're going to bring in the distraction rule here. And distraction simply says, during a round of melee, for each enemy model that is engaging your model, other than the attacker or the defender, you draw -1 combat cards to a minimum of 1. So what is essentially happening here, the Baron is going to attack Beaky Bobby. Beaky Bobby can't hit him back because he's not in range, so he might have to pick a defensive card, but Eric is going to restrict the amount of cards that Beaky Bobby actually draws. So let's draw our cards in. So the Baron has got a melee range or a melee stat of 5. He is very, very good in combat. However, he's the attacker, so he will draw 2 extra cards, taking us to 7. However, there's something else to take advantage of. Eric the Squire has a passive ability called Squire. It says other friendly soldiers within 4 inches get +1 melee stat. Friendly nobles within 4 inches get +2. So actually the Baron, being a noble, is going to draw 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cards. Just a handful of good news here. However, Beaky Bobby, on the other hand, has a melee stat of 2, yet he is only able to draw 1 card because he is being engaged. So he is just going to draw a single card, which he is unfortunately going to have to play. So let's just put that face down straight away. Now, for the Baron, he's got something interesting. If I just pull from his wedge of cards, I notice that actually I have got 3 copies of Rising Attack, and that means that I'm actually going to be able to do something called a critical hit if I can get damage through. So I'll show you how this works using the Rising Attack ability. So, normal process, Baron von Fancy Hat puts 1 card down, as does Beaky Bobby, and we reveal these cards. So, the Baron will reveal his Rising Attack, and Beaky Bobby is going to reveal a High Guard. So, we look at what would happen here. A Rising Attack versus a High Guard would deal 2 damage and obviously suffer 0. So Beaky Bobby at the moment would be suffering 2 damage. Nice and straightforward. However, before we calculate the damage, I can then play any additional cards, whether I'm the attacker or the defender, to double up or triple up that potential damage. So that would go from being 2 damage to Beaky Bobby, times 2 to 4, times 3 to 6. That would be 6 damage going through, which is why crits can be amazing. And that's why knowing how many cards are in this deck or taking certain risks with these cards can be very, very powerful. However, that's not all. Baron von Fancy Hat has got a longsword passive ability, which says that he increases his slicing and piercing melee damage by 1. So we can see the Rising Attack says this can be impact, slicing, or piercing. So let's declare that it's going to be slicing for now. That modifier comes in after you've worked out anything from these cards. So it's not +1 to each of these cards. You work out this so far, so 2, 4, 6, then you add the +1, which takes it to 7. So that is 7 damage that is going through to Beaky Bobby, and his High Guard was clearly a poor choice as the Baron goes upwards with a swing and basically cleaves him in half, and that just removes him from the board, and he is well and truly dead. Now, if Beaky Bobby was holding a Moonstone, at that point he would drop it and the player who killed him would get to put it in base contact. But for now, he's not. He's just simply been absolutely cleaved, hasn't he, essentially? Leaving the Baron still free to take further actions if he wants to. So the Baron is quite simply, he's going to protect his young Squire because the Squire has been very helpful for him. He's going to make a 4-inch move to here, and then he's just going to take a step action with his last bit of energy, just to this position, just to face off against Grub and threaten him should he go towards Eric. But that was a pretty effective round of combat with a critical hit. Okay then, absolutely outraged at the death of his close personal friend Beaky Bobby, Grub is going to step up next. Now if you remember, he is carrying a Moonstone, so he's a little bit laden as he's moving, so his jog is reduced to 2 inches. Now he's not engaged by Baron von Fancy Hat, so he doesn't necessarily have to go towards him, But, you know, he wants some retribution here. So he is going to make his 2-inch jog so that he is within an inch of the Barons. They are engaging each other. And Grub has still got 4 energy, which he has to spend to do these actions that he has now. So the first thing Grub is going to do is he's going to use his Bug Spray ability, and that is going to cost him 2 energy. And for that 2 energy, that will allow him to use this Arcane skill. So the attack is not modified by any evade stat or cover, which doesn't matter because the Baron doesn't have any evade anyway. It's basically a 0. And it will do X magical damage. We're looking for a blue card. So Grub has got an Arcane stat of 4. So we'll draw those 4 cards. And I'll show you them here. There we go. So we can see we've got a blue. And of course the Baron would then draw 6 cards as the defending player. So Grub, seeing that he has 2 of blue, which is exactly what he's after, he's going to place that face down and he's going to say to the Baron, that's a 2 of blue. Now the Baron could, as usual, call his bluff or let him have it. The Baron at the moment doesn't see much of a threat in little Grub, so he's just going to go, yeah, sure, fine, I accept that that is a 2 of blue. So we don't have to show this and we put all the Arcane cards back in the deck. But in terms of damage, that will get round some of the Baron's defences because it is magical. So basically he has plate armour, which reduces all non-magical damage suffered. But as we said, this is magical damage. So the Bug Spray will do 2 magical damage to the Baron, which leaves him on 3 health. The next thing Grub is going to do is he is going to buy an attack on the Baron and see if he can kind of unleash all this pent-up anger. So we're going to spend the energy in order to do that. And Grub, as the attacker, gets to draw his +2 cards. So he has a melee stat of 4 +2, meaning he will draw 6 cards. And the Baron will draw his customary melee stat of 5, but as you remember, he gets a bonus for being near Eric, so that'll boost his options. So knowing that the Baron's quite good in combat, Grub's going to introduce us to something a little bit new, which is called Going For It. Now, once you've both drawn your initial hands of cards, but before you select one, either player can select that they are going for it. And what they do is they expend a point of energy, and that allows them to draw 2 cards. So our little Grub actually is drawing quite a hefty hand of cards here, as you can see. Now, unfortunately, most of them are blue. So our options are limited, but thankfully, we do have, just like the Baron last turn, a Rising Attack card. So Grub is going to place this, and he's going to demonstrate in a second what a signature move does. The Baron's going to pick from his mountain of cards, and he's going to place one face down as well. And, of course, we reveal them. So Grub reveals his Rising Attack, and the Baron reveals that he has chosen Thrust. So normally at this point we would see how this balances out. So normally a Rising Attack would deal 1 damage but suffer 2. So at the moment the Baron would be the one doing more damage. However, every character has a signature move on the back of their card, which is basically an upgraded version of an attack. And once you reveal your card, you can then declare that you're upgrading it to a signature. Now, a signature is subject to the critical rule. So if I had more than one Rising Attack, I could actually do like multiple damage here. But if we see Grub's has a signature move on a Rising Attack, and if we flip over his card, it becomes Insatiable Hunger. And Insatiable Hunger actually changes the damage that it does. It deals 3 damage to Baron von Fancy Hat. So actually, rather than taking 1 damage and, dealing 1 damage and taking 2, Grub is actually going to deal 3 magical damage to the Baron. Now, the Baron would still be damaging him back here, but each of these signature moves tends to have something extra, and you can see Grub's at the end says, End step effect. If the enemy is slain and this character is not slain, then this character recovers all wounds and all energy. And because Baron von Fancy Hat is on a measly 3 wounds, and this is a magical type attack, Grub has actually done enough here where he can kill the Baron and remove him from the table. Not only eliminating him, but also then gaining back that energy to put him back on full health and 4 energy, which is an incredible turnaround. Now, Grub has already made a jog. He could go get stuck in, but we know this is going to be a relatively short game, so he's going to simply spend his energy 4 times to make 4 steps to just back away and make sure Eric can't get anywhere near him to deal damage. But that's an impressive showing of what a signature attack can do for you. And so, after seeing his idol absolutely butchered, Eric the Squire is realising that these goblins are really not ones to be messing with. So he is going to just grab a Moonstone and run before the sun comes up. So he's going to spend an energy, which will allow him to harvest this Moonstone. It's on a depth value of 1, so he gets to pick it up. Very much like Grub, he'll become slow. And then he is simply going to back away and leave the big fight in the middle to deal with it itself. So he's going to make a 2-inch jog. And then he's going to spend his energy twice to make 2 step actions. And he is just going to literally turn tail and run away with that Moonstone. Live to fight another day. Maybe not become a Baron. Okay, so things are getting really dicey here. So let's show off another mechanic, which is how these combat cards can actually interplay with each other. So Doug is going to go. He's going to see if he can replicate Grub's brutal damage. And he's going to again use that charge active ability. So he's going to spend 2 of his 3 energy. And that will give him a 4-inch push directly towards an enemy. He's going to choose Mr. Flintlock here. And usual bonus, if he spends an attack now for melee, he will be doing +2 damage. That's exactly what Doug is going to do. He's going to spend an energy and he is going to make an attack. So Doug's melee stat is 4, but because he's the attacker, he draws 2 extra cards. So he's got quite a decent hand, as you can see it, of attacking and defensive cards. And as usual, Flintlock will draw his melee cards where he has 3. So Doug has a number of options here available to him, but the one that he's liking the look of is the fact that he actually has 2 thrust attacks here. And Doug prefers to try and deal piercing damage with his lance. So he is going to place down one of them face down here. And in retaliation, Flintlock is going to place one of his cards. So no one's going for it, no extra modifiers to worry about, we just reveal the card. So Doug will reveal that he has chosen a thrust, and Flintlock is going to reveal that he has chosen a sweeping cut. So it says here that thrust deals 0 damage to a sweeping cut, not just 0, null damage, so you don't even get the +2 bonus from the charge, and receives 0 damage back from the sweeping cut. But you'll notice there is a yellow circle, and that creates the opportunity for something called a follow-up attack. Now, a follow-up attack is resolved after that round of melee is completed. And what it allows you to do, if the character is not slain, the one who has this yellow circle on their attacks, in this case it would be Flintlock's, they can then choose another card from their hand and place it faced up. And that will then be used against Doug's original attack. Now, there's no danger in a follow-up attack of you taking damage. So Flintlock is actually going to use a thrust attack of his own. Now, a thrust versus a thrust would normally deal 3 damage and receive 3 because you're both kind of stabbing inwards. But Flintlock knows that he can't take any damage from this. So actually, it's going to deal a straight 3 damage to Doug. Not only that, Flintlock is equipped with the dagger, which means he deals +1 piercing damage to Doug, meaning that would be 4 damage going through. Now, Doug is very lucky. He has a jousting shield, so he reduces any piercing and impact damage by 1, but it still means there is 3 damage going through on that attack from Doug. So you can see that sometimes being the attacker isn't always great. You have to pick very carefully because these yellow circles can absolutely ruin your day. So the carnage that's been this turn is going to take another twist as Flintlock is now going to see if he can shoot Doug off his pug to finish this kind of deathly turn. So he's going to spend one of his 3 energy to use the Take Aim active ability. And what that will do is it'll increase his Arcane stat by 1 until the end of the turn, which is really good. Next thing he's going to do is naturally he is going to shoot his musket, which means that we're going to have to go to our Arcane deck and we're going to check to see Flintlock's Arcane stat. It is 3, and we look at Doug's Evade, it is 0. So Flintlock would normally be drawing 3 cards, but obviously he gets the +1 because he's taken aim. And as you can see, he's managed to draw a 3 of greens. So that's the colour we're looking for. So he is going to place this face down to Doug, and he's going to declare that's a 3 of greens. You know, be very honest during this demo game. Now, Doug has drawn his 6 cards. There's absolutely no way that Doug believes that that is going to be a 3 of greens, and there's nothing really for Doug to lose here. If he just accepts it, he's going to die. So he's going to call bluff, but as we know, Mr. Flintlock has been more than honest about this. So this would be 3 plus 2 impact damage, which would be 5. Doug reduces it by 1, but it's still enough to wipe him off the board. However, because Doug guessed incorrectly, that does mean that Flintlock does have the ability to take the action again, even though it's a once per game ability unless it's reloaded, this is like a ricocheted bullet, and fire his shot once more at a different target. Now, he could shoot the Vicious Midget, but because Flintlock doesn't have a green card in his hand, he's simply going to pass and accept that that is just a good shot to get rid of Doug. Now, he would love to reload his gun for subsequent turns, but he can't because he only has the 1 energy. So a very simple task for Flintlock. He is going to take his jog action for free. He's going to take a harvest action, and he is going to pick up this Moonstone next to his buddy Friar Flavius, and that will end his activation. Okay, so we're going to wrap up this game now with our final couple of activations. We're going to go with the Vicious Midget, who unfortunately got teleported back last turn. He's going to make his jog action, and he's going to harvest this Moonstone for 1 energy, which means that he is going to be slowed. And then he is simply going to make 2 step actions to just get away from the imminent trouble. So he's going to move 2 inches, and he's just going to go to here. Now, the Friar could spend his energy to make a reaction step in one of these and move an inch forward, but he's simply going to wait for his activation. And he's going to do much the same. So he is going to make a 4-inch move to this position here. He is going to then spend his first energy to take a step, his second energy to take a step, and then his third one, he is going to harvest the Moonstone to take its depth value from 2 to 1. And that would bring us to the end of this second turn. Now, like I said, Moonstone is usually a 4-turn game, and if you haven't noticed, by luck or by design, both of the sides of this game currently hold 2 Moonstones. Now, I'll allow you to finish this, in your own time and see who would win, but imagine if this was turn 4 and you were level pegging. What would happen is you would enter something called Sudden Death. And Sudden Death takes you into a 5th turn, you'd roll for initiative as normal, but as soon as one side has more Moonstones than the other, maybe they've killed someone or they've picked one up, they instantly win, so it's very much living up to its name. But with all that covered, let's go to the outro. And there we go then, a couple of turns of Moonstone. I hope that's been an enjoyable way of you getting a sense of how this really intuitive and fun skirmish game can be played, and hopefully encourages you to get hold of some of the models and get them on the table. Now, if anything has popped up during your viewing, be sure to check that description below where I'll have links to local communities, online resources, rules, all manner of stuff that you can have a look at. If it's not there, just pop a comment below and I'll be sure to get back to you. Now, this won't be our only stop for Moonstone. We're hoping to do some battle reports in the near future, starting with introductory amounts and then maybe scaling up a little bit. I'm really excited to get my fawns, the hunting horns, on the table. And if this has been something that you've enjoyed, please consider hitting the subscribe button. If you like these tabletop tutorials and they help you to learn games, please also then consider having a look at our Patreon or our wonderful merchandise, which again, you can find the links in the description below. But all I have to say is a massive thank you to Goblin King Games for providing the resources for this tutorial and just making a really fun game. I've fallen in love with it, it's really good fun to play with my wife, and I'm really looking forward to making more content on this wonderful game we call Moonstone. So I hope you have a lovely day, guys. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Hi guys, thank you very much for watching our content. It means the world to us. If you'd like to see some more videos, they should be over here. And if you'd like to support our channel, keep these lights on. You can find links to our Patreon and merchandise in the description below. See you later.